From voluntarily surrendering his psychology license over 2 decades ago to being accused of creating a toxic work environment on set, let's check out why Dr. Phil is not a real doctor. For starters, he had his license taken away for a very shocking reason. Alright, I've got to admit, we've all tuned in to watch Dr. Phil's TV show every once in a while, but how many of you know what's actually going on behind the scenes? Sure, the 72-year-old is a doctor of philosophy, but that's pretty much about it. He received his degree from the University of Northern Texas, and from there, he later went to obtain his license to practice psychology in Texas. 10 years down the line, in 1988, there were 2 complaints of misconduct that almost turned his career around. In fact, one of them was an accusation of misconduct against a patient. Seeing this, the Texas State Board of Examiners of Psychologists decided to launch an investigation into his medical practices. But since they couldn't find any kind of reference to physical contact, his complaint file was closed in 1990. Although they did find out that McGraw sustained an improper dual relationship with his then 19-year-old client. Basically, he acted as both her therapist and her employer. But all the board did was issue him a letter of reprimand and assigned another psychologist to monitor his practice. On top of that, he was required to take some sort of ethics class along with a complete psychological evaluation. But that wasn't the end of it. If anything, it kicked off the series of complaints that were yet to follow. And with a bunch of them piling up, his license to practice psychology was already at risk. And in the middle of all that chaos, Dr. Phil debuted on September 16, 2002. But 5 seasons in, the host decided to end the controversy himself. So he voluntarily surrendered his Texas license in 2006, and from then on, he wasn't allowed to practice psychology of any kind in the United States. Now, I definitely understand that Dr. Phil started off as a harmless talk show where he'd offer advice in the form of life strategies, but you've got to admit, over the years, it's gone way beyond that. In fact, there's even an ongoing controversy in the clinical psychology world where a bunch of real psychologists are concerned. Is the TV program violating the law by offering the services of a psychologist? Because not only would that be illegal, it's also highly unethical because he's risking people's lives for this. And trust me, I'm not the only one saying this. Even the National Alliance on Mental Illness confirmed that he's offering his televised guests a definitive diagnosis, including a pharmacological assessment, without careful evaluation or referral. And this can easily lead to legal consequences since he doesn't have a license anymore. Plus, his show films in California, and practicing psychology without a license is literally a felony. But this has been going on for a couple of years now. So why hasn't anyone held him accountable yet? Well, it seems like he's got his legal tracks covered thanks to some shady paperwork. That's right, y'all. If you've ever been on the show, you know they have the guests sign some kind of paperwork that clearly states that all he's doing is offering advice. And I think we all know that it's way beyond harmless advice here. But that clause right there easily exempts him from any consequences of the counseling he actually offers on the show. To top it off, on the Today Show back in 2008, the celebrity doctor made it pretty clear that he's retired from psychology. Although I could list out a bunch of episodes from the show, he definitely forgot about his retirement as he went on to offer therapy to his guests. In a way, many times it seems like the man is all about sensationalism and ratings to the point that he'd even be willing to embarrass or bully many of his guests. Because think about it, the more dramatic it is, the better. Although, generally, the exploitative nature of the show itself isn't just unethical, but also threatens the mental health of the guests on the show. And let's not forget that there are millions of people watching, and Dr. Phil is just a very big influence on a major chunk of his viewers, too. To top it off, he's not even legally allowed to do half of the things he does on the show. It just strips away the impression of professionalism on the show, and people aren't just questioning his authenticity. Many claim that a bunch of his guests are just paid actors. Not to mention, his approach also attracts some attention-seeking guests who want their moment of fame. But again, that sort of blurs the boundary for his guests too, many of whom are on the show for some sort of life-changing advice. And while these allegations seem to further question his authenticity, his past doesn't paint him in a very good light either. Take his marriage, for example. Sure, he seems happily married to his current wife, But his first marriage wasn't really a walk in the park either. From stripping down her wardrobe to counting every single calorie she eats and putting her on a weight training regime, he was accused of being abusive and manipulative, trying to control every single aspect of her life, not to mention the countless patient misconduct allegations that he shut down by voluntarily surrendering his license. So tell me, when that kind of man comes to live to advise others on how to fix their marriages and be better people, how many of his viewers are going to be okay with that? And while most of them are questionable allegations, he is a very controversial figure to say the least. The same kind of person who pretty much exploits people with serious mental illnesses and disabilities just for entertainment, not to mention the fact that he and his staff put a bunch of his guests in physical danger. An example of this case is Kayden Mahaffey. Back in 2019, she sued Phil McGraw and CBS after her disastrous appearance on the show. The lawsuit implied that she came on the show in 2017 to seek help for her boyfriend, who was mistreated by his family, and instead of intervening or providing support, the majority of the time, the show was making fun of her mental health problems. And so, in the lawsuit, Mahaffey accused McGraw of aggressively interrogating her and inviting the audience to laugh at her.
I have a lot of broken bones. Can you tell me where they are?
I'm not in a good space right now. I feel like I'm being totally attacked.
Not to mention, this led to a pretty significant mental breakdown backstage, which ended with her going to a mental health facility, against her will. And that's just one of the hundreds of cases that follow the same pattern. On top of that, if the allegations and lawsuits weren't enough, it seems like the staff working on the show had quite a lot to add to the pile too. A bunch of current and former employees claim that the workplace is toxic. Behind the scenes, it's still bringing up a lot of fear, intimidation, and even racism, which is probably why all of them wanted to stay anonymous, even when they came out in public. They just didn't want to face any kind of retaliation. In fact, many of the employees claim that despite working on a show that's supposed to help people improve their lives, their own mental health has suffered at the expense of working for McGraw. Everyone's pretty miserable, and there's just a lot of anxiety in the air. On top of that, terrible working conditions only make this kind of thing worse, with some employees even claiming to have nightmares. And when some of them finally decided to quit, they literally had to go to therapy just to get over it. That's so wild because imagine working for a so-called therapist and needing therapy because the entire experience is just so traumatic to begin with. Now, none of these employees who came forward witnessed him directly engaging with anyone involved in some sort of toxic or abusive behavior, but it's hard to believe he had no idea about it. Over 10 employees confirmed that it was common to be screamed at by senior-level employees. Although they definitely pointed out one person in particular, the executive producer is Carla Pennington. And you're telling me that after running a show for about 21 seasons over almost 2 decades, he had no idea what was going on in his workplace? Or did he just not care? I mean, there are a lot of ways to look at this. Plus, some employees mentioned that they were encouraged to perpetuate racist stereotypes on screen, while others dealt with actual racism off screen. But what's McGraw's take on all this? Well, his attorney has denied every single allegation made by the employees, insisting that there's no way the show encourages any sort of racism, bullying, or unprofessional behavior. Instead, the attorney claims he created a collaborative and safe environment for all his staff and guests, even if the actual people he's dealing with don't agree with that. Clearly, it doesn't seem like there are going to be legal consequences to follow, especially after how he somehow managed to always save himself over the years. So, after being accused of creating a toxic working environment on set, voluntarily surrendering his psychology license over 2 decades ago, this was all about why Dr. Phil is not a real doctor.